Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our initial launch of the English program streaming from Addababai Media. Addababai Media is a space where we openly discuss Ethiopia's political, cultural, social, economical, and religion issues. This program mainly focuses on the life of the diaspora and the generation that follows. We will have conversation on a wide range of topics, and we hope that you find it educational, informative, and entertaining. This is Salamawit Adeno from Seattle studio. Today, I will bring you a very special guest. He is an education expert, previously served as the Dean of Holy Trinity Theological Seminary in Ethiopia. He was a principal at American School in Addis, an assistant principal in New York City, and also a principal in Connecticut. Currently, he is the president of the United Orthodox Tewahido Youth, also known as UOTY, conference in North America. He is also a husband and a father. Kesis Sayfe Selasse. Thank you for joining us today. So you were born and raised here in the US, and you also lived in Ethiopia for a few years. Tell us, what is the striking difference between the Ethiopians that live in Ethiopia and the diaspora here?
I would say culture. I think that the Ethiopians that live here are bicultural, a lot of them. And that mix in culture causes there to be a lot of different expressions of the same root or concepts, you know? So people express things differently when they have exposure to different information. And I think that you see it expressed a little bit differently here than you do in Ethiopia. All facets of life. When I say it, I mean all facets of life.
So do you see that difference causing issues for the generation here that they that follows?
Well, I think, you know, when we talk about differences between generations, there's always a generation gap. And that has to do a lot with, you know, the amount of knowledge that one generation has versus another generation. And I think that here in America, that's probably a lot of what the diaspora is experiencing. There's an information overload, so to speak, in America. And that amount of information kind of makes you impulsive. It makes you want to act in ways that I think that maybe it didn't seem necessary to act in Ethiopia, from my experience in Ethiopia as well.
What does Ethiopia and the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahido Church mean to you?
You know, in a very few words, it means the right faith. You know, for me, I'm looking for an expression of the true faith of Christ through the apostles.
Right.
And that's what the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahido Church means to me. In particular, the terminology Tewahido speaks to a theological perspective that was developed early on in the church and can be seen rooted in biblical scripture from the New Testament. And the concept is an expression, an authentic expression of Christ and the incarnation of Christ. And I think that was the big challenge in the first 400 or 500 years of the church, which is how do you be as authentic as possible when you're trying to describe something that cannot be fully understood by human beings?
Interesting. So let's talk about the second generation. I know you're doing some amazing work with the youth through UOTY. Tell us about what you're trying to accomplish and the challenges you face.
Well, I don't say that I'm doing the work in particular. I think everyone is doing the work that needs to be done with the youth. You know, what are we trying to accomplish? The big goal is to try and make sure that we don't lose children from the church, that we present the church in a way that is engaging to the youth, and that we make sure that they fully understand as much as possible of the church's teaching. these would be three big goals, not to lose the youth, presented in a clear way, and make sure that there's understanding. And because of that, a lot of the work that we've been doing in the UOTY is focused on making sure that there's English service available to the kids. And when we say English service, it doesn't mean that the Kadase is completely done in English or anything like that, where even though in some cases there probably have been people who have taken English service to that level. But what we mean is that there's at least a balance of English language available to the young people in the services of the church, whether it's in the Kadase or in preaching and gubayes, for example. We try and make sure that that is available. So a big part of what we've started out with has been youth gubayes, where we're kind of encouraging churches, the Sabeka Gubaye, to allocate, time and resources to having youth get together and learn about the church. This kind of has two layers to it, because it creates it deals with that question of culture, because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and Ethiopia are almost synonymous in identity. When you look at the culture in the country, you have a lot of kids who were born here or who were raised here who don't feel like they are part of the church because they lack that cultural experience. And by having these gubayes, it gives them a chance to become part of the culture. The youth will wear, traditional clothing and, church, because it's an expression of the religious aspect of the church, to dress in white and to wear Habesha lips. They will, many times parents will, prepare injera as part of, the meal, so to speak. And these are the external, the visible things. But the internal things that are happening, the invisible things that are happening, is we're talking about in these gubayes concepts or a Christian worldview that is very different from the Christian worldview here in America. Our gubayes will talk about, the 5 pillars of the church's mysteries, right? And within the 5 pillars of mystery, you have things like, the mystery of the Trinity, the mystery of the Incarnation, and, the mystery of Holy Communion, the mystery of baptism, and then ultimately the mystery of the resurrection of the dead. And, when you look at the question of a resurrection, well, the resurrection of the dead comes to everybody, whether they're rich or whether they're poor. But if you're poor in spirituality, if you're poor in virtue, then your resurrection is going to be bad. If you're rich in spirituality, if you're rich in virtue, then you attain a good resurrection. Now compare that to, the culture or worldview of Christians here in America, who basically say that, God is a God of prosperity and God is God of making sure you're wealthy and successful. And that is how you know that you're moving forward towards the kingdom of heaven, because God has blessed you with all these material things that you can do other good material things with. And as a result, you'll get a good, standing in front of God. When you start looking at, really what's popular here in America as Christianity, it's more like a Christian capitalism, a Christianity that's based on capitalism. And that, our youth then are really looking at their spiritual lives as being based on these external visible things, like whether or not they have a nice house, or whether or not they have a nice car, or whether or not they go to a right college. And ultimately, that expression is not what you find in the Ethiopian church's expression of Christianity. So when we have these gubayes on the internal side, the invisible side, what's happening is we're starting to address, a worldview that is kind of skewed by, Western Christian ideas that are really modern expressions of Christianity. So you know, in our teachings, you'll hear about the salvation of Adam. You'll hear about the saints and the struggles of the saints. You hear about martyrdom. These are all early church teachings that really talk about how the Christians moved away from worldliness towards godliness and what that expression of God really should be. So a lot's going on at our conferences. They're good, I would say. I've had some feedback from the youth on that, and I think that they're really important for our youth as well.
So how is the outcome so far, and how are the parents receptive of this conference?
I think we have good outcomes. You know, I kind of, maybe I look at it differently than other people. I'm not per se an Ethiopian youth who might be standing in the place of saying, well, things aren't moving fast enough for me. And I've had the experience of living within Ethiopian culture and being within the church for over 25 years. And I look at it from the perspective of we're making, you know, good progress, knowing that, you know, 5 years ago, this was the last thing that anybody was thinking about. You know, maybe 10 years ago, the idea of English service for Ethiopians was very far-fetched. So I think that there's a lot of positive growth. I think that parents are the ones who are the most receptive. I think that there are challenges, unless there are parents involved, people who have children actively involved in the Sabeka Gubaye, we don't see that much movement in terms of this kind of, you know, Gubaye, because the focus might be on something else because they don't have children. So, you know, it's been parents who have been actively working in Sabeka Gubaye, or people who have taken it to the Sabeka Gubaye and say, look, you know, we're participating in the church and we want to see our kids stay in the church for the future. What can we do to make that happen? Those people are the ones who are really taking the initiative to make these kind of events happen. Also, you know, you have to give credit to all of the other religious organizations that support, you know, the growth and development of the church, like Mahabara Kudusan, Bala World, all of these gubayes that are really interested in gathering people together and making sure that the church is growing. They also have been very supportive in promoting youth gubayes as well. So I think that it's a combination of all of these interests, you know, parents, the different mahabars that are able to see that we have to have a focus on our youth. The parents in particular, I would say, are the ones who are the most, I would say, sometimes frightened that they could, you know, potentially lose their children. You know, bring your child to America for opportunity and strip them of their culture and their religion. You know, that's a big fear to parents. So I think parents have been really receptive. And at this point, you know, I think we've had gubayes in every major city. You know, we had a branch of UOTY just opened in Australia. We're about to open a branch in Philadelphia. They've just asked to start a branch there. We have branches in Minnesota. We have branches in Denver, Las Vegas. Let's see, here in Kansas, Atlanta, Nashville. You know, if I could sit down and just, you know, Boston and major cities. And the branch concept is just, it's not like, I guess it's it's really a youth group, you know? And one of the reasons why I think the branch concept is important is because, you know, one of the things that happens in the church is there's not much of a space for children to be active, to do something. And so instead of going constantly to the Sabeka Gubaye and asking them to organize a Gubaye, we would prefer that the kids start to learn how to organize their own Gubaye and understand the operations of the church so that they can go to the Sabeka Gubaye themselves and say, look, we think we want to have 5 Gubayes this year or 3 Gubayes this year. It's going to cost us this much. We're willing to do this much fundraising. And then what you'll see is that we're not only building their knowledge of the church, but we're also making them active in the administration, in a sense, of a church and understanding how things operate and how things happen, so that they can navigate, you know, the church's bureaucracy, I guess you would say, in the future, because there is somewhat of a bureaucracy to getting things done. But if you've never tried to do anything within the church, you don't know, and you might think you'll get something done in a day that might take you 2 weeks. And so it also helps the kids to understand, you know, why we have checks and balances within the church in order to avoid certain things. And often they complain to me like, oh, this is hard. But I'm like, yeah, but still, every organization has its checks and balances. Ours are more cultural. They're rooted in different traditions. You know, some of those things are changing and things are becoming a little bit faster to do things. But the reality is that, you know, you're dealing with a bicultural organization that has people who are using cultural norms from America, trying to get things done with people who use cultural norms from Ethiopia. And so that's a big part of, you know, our growth. I don't say it's rapid, but I would say it's moderate growth. And, you know, an example of that would be, you know, maybe 2 years ago, you know, I think of a particular city where I went and we had a Gubaye, and the Gubayes were really good, but then, you know, we didn't have Kadase mixed with English and Giz, you know. By the 3rd year, the priest himself came and was like, you know what, Kesis, we want to do a Kadase in English and Giz. You know, we want the kids to understand the Giz and do the Zema as a tradition of our church fathers. But the reading, we want them to understand when it says, you know, this is the body of Christ. And, you know, we truly believe that without, you know, a twinkling of an eye or a minute was his Godhead separated from his manhood. There are fathers in the church who are saying, we want them to hear that part because that's our doctrine. And they need to understand that. And so, you know, now, you know, 3 years later, along with the Gubaye is the Kadase. You know, so things are moving moderately. It might take time, but there's no reason for us to run, you know, at high speed to do things rapidly. I think that we have to do things as a community, and everybody has to accept them.
Well, thank you, Kesis. So can you just mention a bit about the challenges that you face? I'm sure there are a lot of challenges, so just a bit, and how you're trying to overcome those challenges.
I think that one of the challenges is that we're in every state. We're all over the place. And so the challenge for us is a very real American cultural problem, which is being able to work across networks. And we have to actually build ourselves an infrastructure in order to work with each other. Because, you know, for years, the church here didn't have strong dioceses. And now I think we have dioceses in practice, but we don't have structures within those dioceses to actually expedite this kind of work, you know? So, you know, as we start to do most of this work, it requires us to really be able to work across networks in different places. I think that that's one of the challenges. You know, the challenge I already mentioned is just basic acceptance. You know, there's always the fear that you'll lose something when you do something new. And I think that there's this fear of, you know, there being some loss. My experience has been that the kids who start out in English end up becoming like amazing in Amharic. I'm like, wow, you guys are so fast, because it's in their blood, you know, but they needed some kind of hook to get them hooked to the church. And then they just rapidly start to progress. So I don't see it as there being a problem. I think that what's going to end up happening is it's going to create a passion and a desire within the youth to find out more about their church roots. And ultimately, it will lead to more about their culture.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Kesis, for joining me today. This is all I have for today, and hopefully we can get together and have a conversation on a different topic. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Salam. God bless you.
Amen. Thank you.